So why do we assess vendors? Really, it's to identify, measure, mitigate, monitor, and report on vendors to reduce a few different types of risk. So that could be compliance risk. Maybe you're required to achieve certain regulatory requirements or enforce them across your vendors, or measure controls that vendors have in place to prevent breach or other types of cyber risk, cyber attacks. Eliminate cloud risk, where you might have weak encryption, or ensure your data is protected or always available. Monitoring and reporting on customer-facing products and services that they provide. And transactional risks, such as service level agreements, ensuring that business can recover and continually run. Of course, like credit monitoring, measuring financial strength of vendors and their ability to continue to serve you that product or service that they're providing. And then also identifying operational risks around process or people or where products might fail. So this is really like the goal behind doing a vendor assessment in the first place. So this will help us transition into the traditional assessment process in a way that we go about doing vendor assessments with tools or in manual methods, such as taking all of the requirements that you might need to measure and putting them into a spreadsheet, or identifying really how that information should be measured, if you choose to use a platform like ours, and then identify those vendors that should complete those checklists. Then collect the information from them. So there's a few different ways you can collect. Normally you're sending them some type of notification. Then you analyze that data, develop and draft corrective actions, and work with those vendors to get that action done, and then track those actions and get some type of approval to onboard the vendor. So this is 9 times out of 10, this is kind of the process that most of our customers go through doing an assessment prior to using our platform. And there's lots of reasons why we have customers that are doing vendor assessments is, because of that lean process flow. Off the shelf, we provide a platform that helps automate activities around collecting data and analyzing it, ways to mitigate risks and track the progress of mitigating those risks, as well as reporting on data. So you'll see that today, as well as the content libraries that we provide. So we have over 40 libraries that we provide off the shelf, and they're ready for immediate use in the platform. So if you need to do a vendor risk assessment, not only can we give you the platform to automate this process, but also the content criteria that you might want to evaluate your vendors against. Whether you're ISO 27001 shop, or you're adopting the NIST cybersecurity framework, or you like the Cloud Security Alliance, you can use these frameworks off the shelf in our platform. And then finally, we offer service like subject matter expertise to help you pick up your program and put it in our platform. So that's especially valuable when you need to scale process and you simply don't have the internal resources to do that. So at a high level, the workflow we're going to be going through today is going to be creating an assessment. And we're either going to distribute the assessment or we're going to collect the data through a portal. So I'll be discussing 2 approaches to do vendor assessments today, and the reasons why we might want to take one approach over the other. Then those assessments are completed, they're scored, and we can identify risks within those assessments and then determine if that's acceptable or not, and then recommend some action for that vendor to take in that scenario, or require the vendor to take some action in that scenario. So assessment process can start in one of 2 ways. We can send out an email communication directly from the platform. I'll talk about exactly when this is sent. Email can be sent directly to the vendor. They would click a link, and that would take them to the assessment that they have to complete. So in this scenario, you kind of have to know who the vendor is. You have to have their email or their contact information. You have to associate that with a vendor name, right? So this is the type of assessment or the approach to an assessment that you would take if you are already doing assessments with vendors on some frequency or schedule. The second approach, which is much more convenient from an administrative standpoint, is to just have a portal that exists on your website or some type of link that would push vendors through an assessment process from a self-service standpoint. So imagine having a page on your intranet or on your website where you could initiate the vendor assessment process. So from here, I could go ahead and start this assessment and then kick off the vendor assessment that needs to be completed. So I'll be showing you this in a moment. When we talk about creating either one of these processes, it's really based on the data that we have. If we have a huge list of vendors as well as contact points for those vendors, then it does make sense to kind of take the first approach that I was mentioning, where we go in, we create an assessment, we upload our list of vendors, we upload our list of vendor contacts, and then we select them and say, okay, here's the vendors that we're going to assess. Maybe we assess all the vendors. Maybe we only assess a portion of vendors. And we notice here that we have the ability to associate a contact with the vendor. So this is how we ensure that this vendor's information is separate from another vendor's information, is we create this asset or this vendor record and associate a contact with that vendor, and that gives them access to that data. So this is how we make sure everyone can only access the information that they should be able to access, as well as do many assessments all at the same time. So in here, we're just going to select a few vendors. Then we'd select the criteria that we want to address across those vendors. And I put in my start and end date. And now when I create this assessment, the platform will automate the communication over that time frame to these vendors. So I don't need to chase them. The platform's simply going to communicate with them based on their status in their assessment, whether they have started, whether they're in progress, whether they haven't finished and we're getting close to that end date. It's going to take that action for us to remind them. And if they're not starting or they're not getting finished or they did not finish, then the platform will reach out to us and let us know. And when I say us, I mean those that are doing assessments. As far as what is in this assessment, we can really assess anything that we want. We do have integration with third-party data sources like CAP Index, Security Gauge, World Aware. So we can pull in like geopolitical risk and other factors to automatically calculate this risk score. So that's what's happening for some of these generic vendors that I have here, is we're using third-party data to calculate that value. But we can collect additional information, something more control-based or policy-based within the assessment that's sent to that vendor. When I created this assessment, if I was the contact for this vendor, I would have just received an email from the system. And that email can say whatever you want it to say. It could look just like what I was showing you a moment ago in the presentation, but there's a link in that email. And when the vendor clicks the link, they're brought to the assessment that we've sent them. They can only see what it is that you've given them access to. So here, if I'm a contact for this vendor, that's all I'll be able to access, all I'll be able to see in the application. And I would be pushed through the criteria. Now, you don't need to train me on how to do this. When I log in the first time, there is going to be a pop-up where the system's going to tell me, how to do this assessment, how to perform it. It'll visually guide me through the process of doing that assessment in the platform. So you don't have to train me. I can go through and provide you with whatever information it is that you requested from me. So this is all customizable. You can have your own names of categories and your own names of criteria that you evaluate within a category. And as vendors provide the information that was requested of them, the application will automatically take action on the back end. So the vendor necessarily can't see, if what they're doing is good or bad in any scenario here. But individuals would get that alert right in their inbox. If a vendor is not taking some action and that's required, or if you'd like a more hands-on approach to reviewing content, if I say no here and the action is to offer some task or some recommendation in that scenario, we can generate an alert to whoever is managing this assessment for them to come in and offer that recommendation for that vendor in that scenario. So I'll be showing you that more hands-on approach here in just a moment. Also notice that we are eliminating all steps and back and forth. So you have a streamlined workflow here through the vendor assessment process. So if I'm a vendor and we do supply software to you as the organization here, then notice there's only one control here. In that scenario, there's a very different set of criteria that we're going to be evaluated. So here we're looking at coding practices and we're looking at security code review. So it does adjust dynamically based on like what a vendor is doing for you. And this isn't hard coded. You can customize this framework to, again, collect all information in any scenario from any vendor. But let's fast forward. Rather than reaching out to vendors, like sending them an email, we want to have that self-assessment process. I talked through the first part of how we can communicate out a vendor assessment. If you have an annual vendor assessment that you have to do with a certain set of vendors, this is traditionally like the approach that you would take. But let's talk about a second approach where you'd want to collect data from vendors as you determine if you can do business with them, maybe as part of procurement process. So you really, you won't even know who the vendor contact is, and you need to support that self-assessment process for the vendor to be able to initiate the start of the assessment rather than you to specify the start. So how we do that is within, the same assessment that we've created, we turn on a portal. So here we can see in this assessment that we're going to address these categories of criteria anytime we do this assessment. And we can turn on what's called a self-assessment portal. So in this scenario, we can have a layout for that portal. We can tell, vendors what it is they're supposed to do. We can determine what information we want to collect from vendors within that portal and the content that we'll address. And then we can use this link to direct partners or vendors to that portal. So rather than, again, having to do the data entry on our end to say, okay, here's the vendor and here's the vendor contact, we just share this link here with vendors via your website or, just a general email that you might send out or share with another team. And this allows that vendor to, again, self-initiate that assessment. So let's go ahead and open up this demo assessment. And I'm going to grab the portal page link for this assessment here. And I'm just going to kind of simulate me clicking this link from your website or, some other place other than the email that the application would normally send to collect this data from a vendor. I'm going to do this in a incognito window, just to give you a better idea of how this works. So notice here, I'm currently logged into the application, but if I was a vendor, I wouldn't be, right? So I'm going to go in private is what Firefox calls this. And I'm going to paste that self-assessment portal link in here. And what this does is, imagine if I click this button to start the self-assessment process on your website, this is what I would see. It would be a self-assessment portal that's been set up to push me as the vendor through that assessment. And you can have anything you want in here. So here, this is the layout that I chose for this portal in the assessment that I was showing you a moment ago. And here's the first question in the list of criteria that I'm trying to evaluate with this vendor. But again, I'm not specifying the vendor that has to do this. I just give them a link, they go through, they fill out the information in the portal to include everything that we might need to collect. And when they finish the assessment, I capture the information that I would normally enter into the application to send the assessment out in the first place. So this process has lower administrative effort on the system. You don't have to do all this data entry yourself, and you can use it to kind of populate the application with your information going forward. So I'll just go ahead and fill this one out. Let's say Curtis Smith, vendor 2, and we're going to say Curtis at not a real email.com. And when I say access my report, now I get the results of the assessment that I need to take action on. So you receive the data internally, or those of you that would need to take action on that vendor assessment internally would receive that email. And those that would need to take some action, they would receive the results of the assessment in that scenario. So you can see how, again, from an administrative standpoint, the process is much simpler if you have that portal sitting there that vendors can go to and kind of self-initiate the process. So here we can see the results of my vendor 2 assessment. Though I completed the assessment, it hasn't been reviewed, so my score is really low. But I can see how I compare against other vendors. Let's go ahead and analyze that assessment, better understand kind of how we do or how we've done against others that have been assessed. So here we're not seeing all of the questions. We're only seeing the questions that deserve our attention, that require some action. And we can see how often this question is compliant. So 50% of the time we get a compliant response here. So about half of our vendors are complying with this requirement. We can enter comments, have conversation with this vendor directly. We can upload attachments, collect data. We can recommend some action to be taken, or we can create some task and track that via email with that vendor directly. So one other thing that I want to call out here, the list of vendors that we're creating, the list of contacts that we're creating as we use that self-assessment portal is being populated within the platform. So it is very easy now to go back and assess this vendor in a repeat assessment and turn on Curtis Smith's account here to reassess that vendor without having, again, to enter that data or go to another system and get that data and enter it into our platform. So this makes orchestrating assessment process much simpler. than having to do a huge amount of data entry. In the event that I was going to track some action here in this vendor assessment that I just completed, let me go to demo 2, and I just want to filter for this vendor 2 assessment here. So let's say I wanted to take action on this issue right here. So have the vendor employees been trained on how to report suspected security violations and vulnerabilities? No, they haven't. So let's say I want to recommend some action that will take every time. So the system can learn. So here, let's say, I want to recommend some action that we should take with any vendor. Here, I'm going to go ahead and say training. And then the recommendation is going to be training employees on how to report suspected security violations and vulnerabilities. So yeah, train employees. So that would be the recommendation in this scenario. Let's say I wanted to go ahead and take action on this recommendation. I want to put that in someone's inbox without providing them a report or some other summary of data. I could, in one click here, put all of this information in an individual's inbox. I can pick the person that would receive this notification. And notice what's happened here is all the information that I needed or that I had collected already, like the question that I asked, the response that was collected, any comments that were entered, as well as the recommendation I provided. It's all here, the vendor, the contact. So after I click this save button, all of the information that's within this task is going to go directly to that individual. It's going to show up in their inbox. You do have the same automated communication over this, the created date and the due date as you do in an assessment. So you don't, again, have to chase a vendor to get the specific information that you need it from them. The system will do that for you and let you know if they're not taking that action. From here, we can look at data in one of two ways. We can generate a report out of the system that would explain the results. If we're using that self-assessment portal, we've already received the report via email. It sent it to us. We're clicking a link in that email and seeing the report, or we can click a link and go to the dashboard and look at the results. The great thing about our dashboard is that it gives you real-time view into where you're at with vendor assessments. So you can see sort of your average risk. You can see that going up and down over a period of time. You can drill down into the assessments that have been completed for vendors. So it's very easy here to see that this testing vendor name was extremely high risk, where some of these others, not so much. We can drill down into the risk by vendor, by risk score. We can look at overall how we're complying with the criteria that we're evaluating. So this is extremely useful in being able to understand like common areas of non-compliance, or just being able to drill down into sets of criteria where you have a lot of risk and want to take some action. So a lot of companies spend a huge amount of time trying to get to what is their risk, but they often run out of time once they get to that data and need to take action. So it's very easy to do within our platform. And being able to see where you're at in real time as far as process goes. So here we can see we have quite a bit of completed assessments, but a few that have not been started. And I can understand who exactly hasn't completed their assessments just by, clicking into that slice there for not completed. Now, any kind of hierarchy that you might have for like vendor types or organizational units or some other jargon here of how we might organize data, that can be incorporated as well. But this is the kind of views of data that you have in our platform. Let's transition back to the PowerPoint here. And I hope I covered well kind of how you can automate and simplify your assessments in our platform from, not only analytics of all your vendors, like understanding where they're scored, being able to just centralize all of that data and analyze that information, generate reports, automate email communication. We do have offline capabilities to be able to do assessments offline. You can use any device. We have those libraries of content that you can use to get yourself started, get your program off the ground. This is a SaaS technology, so if you want to implement this right now, you can just go to our website and put your email address in and you can get started. So in summary, visualize your risk everywhere. You can do that in our platform. Know your risk. That's our goal here at RiskWatch. Use our content libraries, especially where you have a guideline or a best practice that is leveraged in the industry. You can leverage that content through our content libraries and subscribing to those. From an analysis standpoint, you have the analysis capabilities within our platform to understand, the average compliance as well as overall how each vendor is being scored. That process, try it with a few vendors and then scale that. This approach that we take in the platform, we are using objective criteria. So this is not subjective, meaning it's a structured process that promotes standardization and professionalism. And never forget the essentials of risk management. Just don't do anything wrong today. Don't do anything wrong tomorrow. Repeat. As always, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Goodbye.